I came to conviction that, everybody is a developer now, but the tools to be a developer, I don't think like Claude Code is the best tool for like someone who's never coded before to start coding, or even Cursor. Like the IDE is still maybe not the right interface, but more and more people are using code, and the rise of Lovable and Bolt and V0 and all these things I thought was very inspiring. And a lot of that was for generating websites, but there's probably more tasks in your life to automate than there are websites you want to create and maintain. And I felt like that was a really interesting way, not only for us to practice building with Browserbase and Stagehand, but also it is just one new modularity where sometimes our buyer is not a developer. So it just kind of like reflects the many new types of buyers in infrastructure. They're no longer just the staff engineer.
Welcome back to the Open Source Startup Podcast. This is Tim from SMBC and my lovely co-host, Robby from MTF Ventures. I'm super stoked to have Paul, the CEO co-founder of Browserbase. Browserbase is a cloud browser automation platform. Also, the creators of Stagehand, which is a leading open source browser automation framework. So welcome, Paul.
Thank you for having me, guys. I'm here in front of our brand new office and our ginormous life size. It matches the amount of money we've raised. It gets bigger every single time.
I love it. Well, we're really excited to talk because I would say over the last couple of years, Browserbase has become one of the kind of star AI infra companies that every investor, every person in the ecosystem has been excited about. But we'd like to start all the way back at the beginning. So you had this founding memo, which I think was kind of step one in the Browserbase journey, but I imagine you were probably thinking about it even before then. So why don't you bring us back to where the idea came from for Browserbase?
Yeah. So with Browserbase, I had been spending a lot of time at my first startup. I started building and maintaining this idea of a browser running in the cloud. We use these browsers for basically video composition and editing. And I was very frustrated by the technology stack. It turns out the browser that you and I run on our local computers is not designed to be run at scale on servers. It's memory intensive. It's designed for your computer, a Mac OS or a MacBook Air, not for a Lambda, right? So this was kind of the bane of my existence for several years of my life. And after selling that company, I continued to work on browser infrastructure at the acquirer. And through a couple years of doing that, and then also seeing the rise of agentic applications and early forms of AI agents, I knew that when you had a large language model that could generate code and use that code to control a browser, I came back to the same problem. Well, okay, I got to pull out all my old code for managing browsers at scale. And that's where I started with this memo, an internet browser for AI, in November 2023. It's coming up on 2 years since I wrote that memo, which is pretty crazy. And a lot has changed in those 2 years. But what was true then, which is true now, is that, the future of software is software doing work on our behalf. A lot of the work that you and I do happens in a web browser, going to websites. And if we want software powered by AI to go do work on our behalf, we're going to need to give it the same tools that you and I have. And the browser tool and the browser infrastructure to run those browsers is a very important part of the AI infra stack. And, that's what we're working on at Browserbase. And not only are we running the infrastructure, but also, the frameworks to control the browser and an application layer product to make it easier for everyone to understand what is possible with browser automation. But not much has changed since the original, thesis. It was going to be hey, this is very important. There's all these kind of structural challenges with AI navigating the web that we're going to have to overcome, and models are going to get better. I was pretty confident back in 2023, and I'm even more confident today on the announcement of, Claude 4.5 Sonnet. It's clear that AI will be able to do a lot of stuff on our behalf, and hopefully with the right tools and infrastructure, that'll become possible even sooner than we realize.
And it's so funny to look at your original memo that you put as a blog post to even now your Series B funding announcement with a big B behind it. So very, very fitting that your audience of developers has been expanded, right? So I really want to talk about how you started, because I feel like the developers in your mind back in 2023 is a lot more specific, right? You're talking about playwrights, you're talking about browser automation from very, very programmatic ways, then to Stagehand, then to director. So start with where you started. Who do you build Browserbase at the beginning with? What do you have in mind? And what sort of primitives you were trying to build for them and to do what?
Yeah, there was already we didn't invent the idea of the headless browser or the browser running in the cloud. We definitely, I was using a lot of vendors out there before, and people have been automating and controlling browsers for years now, right? Like there's existing very popular open source frameworks, Puppeteer by Google, Playwright by Microsoft, Selenium by the Selenium Foundation, which have all been tools to automate a browser, often for testing. They're really built for testing, but then a lot of developers were using them for actually like RPA or like process automation. And the frameworks really weren't a good job. We're doing a good job for that type of thing. Browser automation has always been a very brittle thing where a human writes code and the web page changes. A human has to edit that code to make it work with the updated website. And then you have to deploy that code and the infrastructure is painful. So a lot of problems there, right? First of all, running that code at scale, many browsers, very frustrating, very painful for all the reasons I stated, but also you can't see the browser. So there's a lack of observability. When the code breaks, you might not always know. The page might change its little ways, and being able to see what happens in the browser is very, very painful. But then also the fact that there's humans writing this code and maintaining it. And it's the worst type of scenario in software is when you're building a system and some third party changes you don't control can break that system, keeps a lot of developers up at night. So the fact that this was very deterministic code in a non-deterministic internet was very, very painful for the developers. And even just without AI, Browserbase can still be a very large business because providing the infrastructure solution, which is a step function better than building your own browser infrastructure cloud, that is very valuable to developers in a pre-AI world, and it's a defined market. But what happened when AI launched, and there's a screenshot in my original memo, you could see the installations of Playwright over time. You see it start to really take off, right? And even when you normalize it against other installations or down people moving to Playwright overall, it was clear that more and more people were using Playwright during the rise of AI because you basically took something where you used to take one script to automate one website, but then to automate 100 websites, you need 100 scripts. And that's constrained by programmer, ability and time, right? But with the rise of LLMs, which can generate code, you could have one script that generates scripts that automates any website, right? And you kind of decouple the effort of programming from automation. And that really increased our market size because now someone can, on the fly, create a script with Stagehand that might be able to automate 20 or 30 websites in one pass using a large language model to actually look at the page and pick the element to click or pick the action to take. And I think that's pretty rare. It's almost like, the bull case for Snowflake might be that in the past, it was very painful to write SQL queries, but now you can write as many queries as you want all the time. So you'll be querying Snowflake all the time. The same is true for Browserbase. When you decouple human effort from the utilization of the infrastructure, the opportunity of the infrastructure platform goes up quite a bit. And that's what we've been seeing as models have gotten better. We see the duration of people browsing, the number of different use cases has really expanded because more things are possible and you don't need people to maintain all these automations.
Awesome. So I want to get into Stagehand. So talk to us a bit about what the original version of Stagehand had in it. And was it obvious that it should be open source because it was kind of a primitive technology? Was there kind of did you battle it out on the team back and forth? Should we open source this or not? Talk to us a bit about that decision.
No, it was always going to be open source. And the reason we built Stagehand was not that strategic in nature. It was that we looked at the original frameworks, Puppeteer, Playwright, and Selenium. These are all frameworks that were built for testing, optimized for testing, not optimized for automation, and certainly not built to be LLM first. So to get Puppeteer to dynamically automate a page, you had to wrap it with a large language model, right? And we felt like there could be a framework that was designed to work better with large language models as opposed to stuffing it on top. So Stagehand, what's different from Stagehand is that instead of saying, click this specific button, it's the third button on the page, it's red and it says buy now, you can say, click the buy now button in natural language. And then by using the model that you provide to us, we then create a query, a prompt to a large language model that will then identify the right button and a candidate elements of buttons on a page. Over time, that's become very, very powerful. And some very large companies out in the world, the Intuits or the Clays or the Stripes, use Stagehand every day to help automate workflows. And what's kind of cool about that is by starting with the open source framework, one, all these existing frameworks are open source, so it just made sense for it to be open source. Two, we really wanted to build a community because we just knew that automating the web is a massive task. And to build a framework that can adequately do that on every type of website possible was a job that was going to be so much bigger than this team on its own. So third-party contributors are going to be an important part of helping Stagehand actually be, this contender framework of three very already established framework known by many, many millions of developers. So with that in mind, we built the framework to solve the problem that we knew existed. We made it open source because we knew the community was going to need to be involved because it's part of that. And then finally, like, being an early stage startup, like offering an open source framework as kind of one of the first integration points for Browserbase was quite nice going into enterprise sales conversations, because we could always say like, hey, if you love Stagehand, don't worry, it's open source. You could go run this on your own infrastructure if you want. We think that Browserbase is the best browser automation platform for running Stagehand, but it doesn't necessarily have to be your choice. And regardless of what you do, we're very excited about Stagehand and we're going to continue maintaining it. We still dedicate a ton of engineering time for it. So that was kind of like the initial ideas. But honestly, the way it works, like the API contract hasn't changed much since the early versions. A lot of things have gone on under the hood. And one of the benefits of Stagehand is the fact that we maintain it. And when a new model drops, we add support. When techniques change, a new paper comes out, we implement that. One of the things that we did early on, we saw a paper on how instead of using the HTML page in Markdown, using this thing called the accessibility tree, which is like a layout of the page in a different way, we integrated it in Stagehand first before anybody else did. And that was really helpful for our customers because they don't have to change their prompts. By keeping the same simple prompts and stacking them in this kind of, workflow of atomic prompts, they get more reliability, more predictability, but don't have to change those prompts as the state-of-the-art way to interact with the web page with an LLM changes. That's kind of our job as a framework maintainers.
And so, yeah, maybe just talk about like Stagehand as a project and also take Stagehand as a community. Because I think Stagehand as a project is really clear that you really want to capitalize on a larger AI sort of automation space where headless browsers could be used for anything, right? Stagehand is really the primitives of actually navigating these websites and not using like the old school ways of like, knowing exactly what IDs to pick and all that stuff, right? And I think there's so many different ways you can design this interface, and always there are different ways you actually can design a much more different abstractions. What kind of philosophy have you started when you start to create Stagehand, and what sort of things have you learned over time now? Like knowing when you started was almost getting started of the AI web scraping world, right? Now we have a lot more people using it. Has the philosophy all stayed the same, or like a little bit changes based on your learnings? Any major learnings so far?
Yeah. So for context on the scale of Stagehand, it has about, 18,000 GitHub stars, 400,000 downloads per week, and, a community of thousands of developers in Slack, right? So really has gotten, quite a bit of adoption. I think there's like two things that really inspired me. One was the Vercel AI SDK. I really liked how I could build an application with the Vercel AI SDK and change my model and still keep my same kind of application. I thought it was very powerful because the fungibility of models has never been higher. Developers want to switch between models all day long. They want to try different things. And it makes sense because different models are better at different things. Different models are better. If I'm automating Craigslist.org, that might be a very simple model for O-Mini. If I'm automating, the IRS tax website, that might be a more complex model, right? So how do we let developers choose the model that's right for their job? Stagehand was built on the belief that we want to be model agnostic, and it's not one model that will solve all the things, but the right choice of models. And then on the second part, like Stagehand's API and the way developers use it, we really wanted to meet the existing world, the community where it was. And some approaches to this problem could be, here's one single prompt, go do it for me. Go out and figure out the steps to everything. And what I saw with that kind of approach was that it lacked repeatability because the agent would take a bunch of different steps to solve your problem. And when we talked to customers, people who had already been doing web automation, they were more like, I really don't trust AI to do the steps I care about, but I do trust AI to self-heal or fix the step that went wrong. So they were very okay with maintaining their sequence of steps and maintaining their workflow. They already knew that. They just wanted more durability. So the idea of this self-healing selector was something that the team at Zero Step did a really, really good job of. And then they had an acquisition. It was more like a testing use case. So it was kind of inspired by AI testing companies. So we wanted to kind of meet the community where they were, where they already had their workflows, just wanted more durability, but also kind of give them a little bit of AI, not full AI. And that really kind of helped the initial adoption of people who were familiar with web automation, but wanted to bring in AI to make it better. Since then, we've now launched Stagehand Agent, which is more like the latter. As models have gotten better at step planning and kind of context management, you can use Stagehand with a single prompt and it'll just go figure it out for you, which is good for some use cases where you don't know the workflow ahead of time. But the bread and butter of Stagehand is repeatable, atomic browser automation that's also self-healing in a way that's more reliable. And when you use Stagehand, you're going to be able to automate the web in a predictable way. And it's really easy for anyone to get started because each of the prompts are kind of small and in natural language. There are some downsides though. When you're building a framework that's driven by prompts, turns out it's really hard to write good prompts, right? So by constraining the prompting part of Stagehand to small atomic actions, it's much easier for our customers who use Stagehand to get started because it's you're going to be more likely to succeed describing the button you want to click as opposed to writing a novel about the workflow you want to do. It's a lot harder to prompt long context workflows. It's easier to prompt shorter atomic actions that end up being repeatable over time.
Yeah, I like this idea of meeting the market where it is instead of just like trying to introduce like an entirely new like workflow and understanding because you can kind of like bring people to your ultimate vision. Then over the years, this is original Stagehand, not agentic Stagehand, but there's a bunch of partnerships and things that you did to kind of enable more and more. Like, how do you think about from like a strategy standpoint, like who to partner with next, like which users to follow? I imagine like with any open source company, you have like so many different use cases, so many different types of users. Like, do you have kind of a, like when you and your team are thinking about new releases or new partnerships, like a way that you kind or a framework on like how to figure out what to prioritize or who to prioritize?
Yeah, a lot of the time, our most passionate customers open PRs, and we listen to those people. It's like a good friction point. But there's a lot of taste, and when you're building a framework, like framework maintaining is challenging. One of our founding engineers, Dom, was on the Redwood JS team, right? So I learned a lot from him about building great frameworks. And what I would say is that there's always been a destination where we want to go, but by keeping our API surface area quite small, we really only had like 3 functions: act, extract, and observe. I think it was just act and extract in the beginning. You try and avoid feature bloat as much as possible, and instead focus on quality and expansion for our features and our products. So what I didn't want to build was build the everything framework that did everything. I wanted everything to be really, really good at taking actions on web pages and extracting information, and then build the kind of like surface area that would let someone expand upon it and let that kind of guide what we did next. So, when we built like more of the like agentic functionality, that happened because we saw people were wrapping Stagehand in an agent loop. Basically, they would prompt an LLM to write the Stagehand code and execute it. And then we're like, oh, that's kind of novel, right? Like they said, like, okay, here's the task. Use Stagehand as a tool because Stagehand was very good with the models at like taking those individual actions. And I will always kind of believe that like your reasoning loop and your agent loop should be separate from your tool call. That's a good way to preserve context and keep your tool calls more accurate. So by starting kind of on the more primitive tool call level of like take this individual action, extract this individual data, then seeing people stitch together, we've been able to kind of guide ourselves into adding like MCP tool calling support for like when you have to do 2FA, like go use the Gmail MCP tool to get your 2FA header email and put that into the act command, or variables and letting people template in. So you don't want to send passwords to the LLM. So template that. We've added a lot of like these nice features that we really were informed by our customers and our users and the community in Slack saying, here's what we want. And those kind of like emergent behaviors, especially when you see them in aggregate, can be really helpful for building, good abstractions. And in the end, great frameworks used by developers are just really great abstractions that developers love to use because they understand them.
I'm a developer and I always feel like there are actually so many different kinds of developers, right? Especially when it comes to AI world, the number of people building agents in this space is much more wider than your typical infrastructure engineers. Because we see infrastructure engineers that people are actually understanding the headless browsers or down level infrastructure. They're more hardcore. They like to write their own code. They want more control. Like I said, like the abstractions going higher and higher at this point. Like, a lot of people just want to write prompts and very lightweight TypeScript code. And I think given that you're building a framework, right, there's probably need to be like audience in mind. But like, okay, we're going to make sure this works well for folks that maybe understand Selenium and stuff like that. I'm just curious, there's a Stagehand Python, a Stagehand TypeScript, and there seems to be a broader net of audience I assume you're trying to capture. Can you talk about like what was the motivation for you to actually have multiple implementations? Do you think of it differently, or this is just casting a wider net with the same people? Or do you think there's actually a different type of audience doing different things on both sides?
No, I mean, like Stagehand Python and Stagehand TypeScript are both, we want to make first party implementations of both because that's where the community is pulling us. The number one upvoted GitHub issue for the longest time was please build this in Python, right? So we were listening to our users and listening to the community when we drive that forward. I actually think it's wrong to build frameworks with like a growth in mind. Like you kind of build a framework to solve a problem you're passionate about and have a POV on. You don't build a framework to like be viral or be like GitHub stars. Like I think it's actually how you build like slop. So for us, like we're like, this is an opinionated way that we think people should use LLMs to interact with web pages. And through having a point of view and then informing that point of view through conversations with people on the bleeding edge, back in 2023, an LLM controlling a web browser was kind of novel. And Browserbase was providing, and still is providing best-in-class infrastructure for running browsers at scale. So a lot of the things that informed Stagehand was actually seeing our users who had built their own versions of Stagehand on Browserbase and told us the problems. And they said, yeah, like it's really hard to deal with iframes. And okay, that's useful. Stagehand should handle iframes for our customers, right? So, and this is kind of one of the flywheels I talk about at Browserbase, where when you have a product that solves a problem and people use that, they give you feedback, and then you solve that problem. It brings in more customers that then tell you about more problems that you solve, that bring more customers, and it kind of repeats itself. I think that only happens after you solve the first initial problems. And throughout all of this, the most important through line is having a point of view, having taste about what we do and don't want to do, and continue to keep the quality bar high. I think with Stagehand, we've really avoided feature creep in a strong way. And it's been really hard to do that. It's hard to say no when people want us to add more functions, more helper methods, more variables. And it's something that I'm constantly fighting. And I think we actually do a better job of in some ways. We can start removing more stuff from Stagehand. We want to do one thing really, really well. And that's letting you use any LLM to control a browser and automate a task reliably. If we can do that thing really, really well, I think we have a very powerful framework.
Well, I feel left out because with Director, I'm also a developer, Tim. We are abstracting away to the average person. But talk to us a bit about like your investment in open source, Paul. Like, how do you figure out how much engineering resources to put towards it? Also, you're getting a lot of contributions from open source. Like, how do you manage that investment versus just growing the core browser-based business?
Well, the benefit of our infrastructure product is that it makes Stagehand better, right? And all three of our products kind of have this like nice effect where every time I invest in my infrastructure product, it helps my customers of Stagehand because many Stagehand users use Browserbase, right? So Stagehand people were telling me, hey, like I want the browser to be faster. Well, I'll make the browsers faster, right? So I really kind of view each investment into all of our products as helping our wider customer. It's no secret that the majority of browser-based customers use Stagehand, and it's actually it started that wasn't the case, but as more and more as the framework has grown, and we've really optimized it to work really, really well with our infrastructure. That's really been a great path for us to actually better help our customers because it was quite painful for us to support third-party frameworks where we had no control. Now, when a customer comes to us and says, hey, I'm a large customer and I have this request for the framework, we can consider it and prioritize it accordingly because they're funding that through their usage of the infrastructure, right? And our roadmap is certainly not even fully started yet with Stagehand. There's so much stuff we want to build, and I'd like to invest more. It's a team I want to keep investing in. And the big limiter of investment in Stagehand is not capital. It's actually finding the right people that can, shepherd the framework and move it forward. And we have a very high hiring bar at the company in terms of like literal dollars spent on product. At this stage, we've spun up a different brand. We've done all this interesting marketing content. Like we put it out, and it's not something where we track ROI as clearly because we just know it's foundational to our mission that our customers need a framework to control the browser. They need the browsers, and that's what we build with the infrastructure product, but they also need a framework. So for us, it's actually existential that we have a framework that solves the needs that we need. And every time we fix something at Stagehand or add a feature that helps the customer, that's just driving our bottom line forward. And we're focused on making sure that, the next billion-dollar company is built on Browserbase and hopefully built on Browserbase and Stagehand.
So I really want to talk about one thing here that I don't think any of the past open source companies will really even think is important, which you really have like a big model evaluation page right there on stagehand.dev, right? And how you evaluate it, this big leaderboard of models and like really nice looking, by the way. I love it. I'm very curious about that. What is the motivation of putting a big model evaluation page right next to your project? And do you see any sort of like unplanned benefits of doing this? Because this is so new, right? I don't think people kind of like even know the trade-offs of like, oh, should we include this or not include it? Tell us what the motivation and what you gleaned from it so far.
Yeah, it's funny. I actually think it's not uncommon to have evaluations of a framework or benchmarks of a framework, like popular request libraries or popular HTTP servers. We'll talk about like, oh, with Nginx, this is faster, or, like with some part of underlying additional piece of technology. If you're an ORM, you might want to say like, here's the different Postgres providers, and here's which one it runs best with, right? When you are building a framework that depends on infrastructure, both on the browser side, but also on the model side, you want to help our customers make the best choices. And for us, like, we know Browserbase is the best infrastructure. We should probably publish more benchmarks, but it's just kind of been a pretty clear decision. But then on the model side, it's been much more unclear because things are changing all the time. And it's something that our customers should be continuously revisiting. So, right now we show, based on a set of evals that we've developed for Stagehand. And this is stuff like, hey, we found a bunch of complicated date picker dropdowns, which is the bane of the existence of LLMs. It's a multi-step action to pick a date on a website. We've emulated those, create evals, and we test all the models. Every time a new model comes out, we try and publish it very quickly. And that way our customers can add support. It's funny, when 4.5 dropped today, immediately someone was in Slack saying, hey, when's 4.5 support coming out, right? They expect that same day support for these models so they can improve their workflows too. So, and it's kind of tricky with model evaluations. It's not always, what meets the eye. Like, yes, it might have the best score on Sweetbench, but it might not be the best thing for picking date pickers, right? Especially because, computer use models are quite new and aren't always trained to work with Stagehand. That we're working more with labs to help them use Stagehand better. We really just try and be a good advocate for our customers, because for them, like, if they pick a bad model, they have a bad experience with Stagehand, I think it's Stagehand's fault. But it just might be a model that's not really a good model choice for the task they're doing. And the evaluations page helps our customers make more informed decisions so that they can, make the best choice, have the best experience with their product, and hopefully build something valuable and become big customers of Browserbase one day.
So I want to talk a bit about Director and the decision to kind of broaden the scope of who you were going to serve. Was that also a demand you were seeing? But I imagine you didn't have a lot of, everyday non-technical users who were, trying to build stuff with Stagehand. Like, did you just kind of foresee like, okay, there's going to be more people who are going to want to build automations? Or like, where did that decision come from?
I know it's pretty rare to see a infrastructure company launch an open source developer framework and then an app layer product, but we just love stretching ourselves then at Browserbase. We love to do a lot of things, right? No, it's actually, Director was inspired by sometime in 2024, there was this like moment after Cursor really took off where I started getting dentists booking demo calls. And I was like, what's going on here? And it was like not just one, it was like three in like this 2-week time period. I don't know if we went viral on a dental Facebook or something. But I'm thinking about dentists is that they're all pretty smart, went to medical school, pretty savvy people. And they have a lot of bad software around them. And they want to solve their problems. They're often owning their own practices. So these dentists were like, hey, like, Paul, great to meet you. I heard about Browserbase somewhere, and then I found Stagehand. I was trying to use Cursor to build something, but it was kind of hard. I really just want something like low code. How do I get started? Like an easier entry point. And what Director does is actually take a single prompt and actually go through the process of writing the Stagehand script for you to automate some tasks. And the output of prompting and chatting with Director is a Stagehand script. And if you imagine like V0 is for building a website, Director is for building automations to interact with any website. And it's pretty powerful. I often call it the inspiration engine of Browserbase, because as we're creating this market, we're showing people what to do and what is possible. Sometimes the lowest friction way is to give them a prompt box and say, go ask, see what you can do here. And the amount of interesting stories and people I've met who've used Director, maybe for like a one-off task, where then have come back and remembered like, oh, this is what Browserbase does. I talked, AI controlled the website. That's useful. And they then come back in a future touch point with a more robust or a business necessary use case. That's been pretty powerful too. So on the most minimal case, Director existed to generate more Stagehand code, so people will use Stagehand more often and then hopefully use our infrastructure. But on the most maximal case, like Director helps inspire people about this new market we're creating, which is that AI can work on your behalf in the browser. Watch it do it there, and the moment of magic is shortened from maybe minutes if you're vibe coding to hopefully seconds with Director.
And it's really interesting because I've just been playing Director. It's the easiest way to get started, right? You see the browser light up, the website's being open up, and the code is being generated. Like, it's actually really cool to see it live too. And this is all possible because you built the infrastructure to do this in the first place, right? This is actually pretty much just one layer of abstraction on top, which I think is really amazing. I guess this is probably not something you planned on 2023, right? I'm going to just build the whole layers in 2 years and just be able to be like, go pretty much like accessible, be almost like a consumer product. I guess my question is like, when you start to build these abstractions, sometimes you find surprises, right? Because, like Staplix got built on you and now it becomes like a consumer product. Are you getting like so much pull from there and like, oh, there's maybe somewhere we had to rethink our strategy completely? I'm just curious, are you getting these moments now? Because this sort of like abstraction and user experience, like everybody's developer, I guess. And it really changes how we look at the world of how marketing even being done in general, right? We don't have to just be like a TypeScript SDK, Python SDK kind of company. It's like, hey guys and girls, get your credit card ready. You can start to like script anything. Like, is that an inclination of where you think based on what you're seeing with director, or you think we're too early? Browsers is still truly developer in a hard sense for now, or?
Yeah, it's a great question. And I think the sequencing of Browserbase is pretty interesting because generally companies start with the framework first, but we start with the infrastructure first because the frameworks were already adopted. And I'd say the majority of our customers in the first year were switchers. They switched from an existing, DIY infrastructure or their own framework to Stagehand, or maybe started by switching their infrastructure over to Browserbase and then adopted Stagehand later, right? So in a market where there's already quite a few established frameworks, or there's a lot of code already written, we wanted to start with the infrastructure. And then from there, that also informed how to make the framework really, really good. And then finally, like I came to conviction that, everybody is a developer now, but the tools to be a developer, I don't think like Claude Code is the best tool for like someone who's never coded before to start coding, or even Cursor. Like the IDE is still maybe not the right interface, but more and more people are using code, and the rise of Lovable and Bolt and V0 and all these things I thought was very inspiring. And a lot of that was for generating websites. But to me, you probably only need a website like once, maybe. Like, I mean, I made a browser-based tattoo equity calculator in V0 recently. It was very cool. And you can like move the tattoo around and see how much equity you would get if you got the tattoo. Tim, if you want, I'll tattoo it for you. Like that was fun. Like I would never have built that without V0. Right. But I think it's probably more likely that you need to automate a task. There's probably more tasks that you like to automate than there are websites you want to create and maintain. And I felt like that was a really interesting way, not only for us to practice building with Browserbase and Stagehand, and we're, one of our biggest customers via Director, right? So it's useful for us to like go through that experience and maintain that. But also it is just one new, modularity where I can, on a sales call, give someone a demo right there with Director and talk through the Stagehand code and the infrastructure. It's a very powerful POC tool, right? And also, like sometimes our buyer is not a developer. It could be a head of operations as a painful process they're trying to automate, and they've heard about us, or it's a CEO or a founder who's like AI curious, and maybe they're technical, but they haven't been coding in a while. So it just kind of like reflects the many new types of buyers in infrastructure. They're no longer just the staff engineer, but sometimes a product manager or a founder or a head of operations. And directors are kind of our first experiment to really work with those people, and we have a lot of fun launches coming out for it soon.
Yeah, I think it'd be interesting to talk through like a couple of specific examples of like what can someone automate with Director, especially because you have an audience. Unlike when you came with Stagehand, there was kind of like this, okay, I know what I can do with browser automation generally. This is just like a switch. But in this case, it's like net new activity. And maybe it is like a step function of, okay, people are now automating the creation of websites through Lovable and Bolt, and this is just like an extension onto that. But how did you kind of like understand the psyche of like, oh, this user, and here's how we're going to get them to do this thing they haven't done before?
Would you guys like a demo? Do we do a live demo on the pod?
If we can do a live demo, I'm all for it. It'd be the first in 200 episodes.
Let's do a live demo on the pod.
Let's do it. Maybe not as risky a live tattoo, but yeah, let's do it.
Let me pull this bad boy up. Can you see my screen?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Okay, so this is a new redesign that's coming out, but let's pull something up. Like maybe we want to do, like these kind of like B2B use cases. This is going to be one, like verify the California real estate license for this person. So I'll click this prompt, and this is running in dev. So, we'll see how things go, because this is a new redesign that I want to show. It's going to launch very soon. But what it's going to do is it's going to go to the browser and start to, take some actions. And this is an agent loop, right? So it's going to think about what it wants to do. I gave it this task, and this is like a common task. It's some sort of like, hey, I have to verify this license number. There's so many form-based verifications. My wife is a nurse, and everywhere she goes, she has to go ahead and like get her nursing credential checked. And there's a human being going out there and looking up her nursing credentials. Same thing is true with real estate. So you can see on the right side, this browser is actually going through and, taking control and interacting with the page and typing in like, hey, here's the license ID. It even shows where to browse. It uses the search API to go do this thing. And when it clicks find, it's going to find some more information about this realtor. This is actually the realtor on Twitter, Rohin. I'm not sure if you've ever seen this guy before who posts about SF housing, but I got his real estate license from there. So now we can see that it looked up this information about him, and it's generating the code at the same time. Like if I look at the code tab, this is all Stagehand code that we just generated. And from a single prompt, like I now have a workflow where if I change this variable, if I change this driver's license, I said this real estate license ID, I'm then able to, build this piece of software that can go verify this every day. We use Stagehand for registering guests in our office. I use Stagehand for ordering my lunch and picking the salad I want every single week on Forkable. So what's kind of cool is like Director isn't an agent. It's an agent builder powered by our framework Stagehand. And of course, running on a browser, controlled by Browserbase. And we think this is just a really fun place to get started. And of course, you should take this and put it into your IDE or take it and deploy it somewhere else. But at least if we can reduce the friction to building some piece of software that's going to help you accomplish a task, that just feels like a very, very powerful thing.
It is really cool because it does remind me, the first time you used Lovable or Bold, it was so visual and you could just see the results. So you would just invest the time in figuring out how to iterate on it. And the fact that you can just see all the steps and not get bogged down by the code if you're someone who doesn't regularly work with code, you've thought about just the onboarding and how you actually get someone used to new activities really well.
Yeah, so amazing. So I guess I'm really, really amazed how much surface area of developers you're really going after now. And this is anything from getting the license ID on a repeatable basis or building any kind of workflow, right? Maybe talk about how you think of infrastructure in the future. Because I think when I think of browser and headless browsers is only so specific type of people doing it. It's almost a QA testing. The number of people actually doing scraping of Selenium is really expert kind of people. Now you're trying to lower the barrier entry to even anyone. Where do you see this heading? Do you see websites basically becomes crawlable and scrapable by default because I'm going to be browser based anyways? So let me just open up some more access and stuff like that. Or do you think people will try to resist browser based, the CAPTCHA, extra CAPTCHAs and some other crazy paywall? Well, have you gotten into the ecosystem at this point where okay, is everybody receptible to getting scraped or getting programmatic? And do you have to do some sort of even education on this side of the world to hey, we're not evil, we're actually trying to create the new AI native things. How much is part of your job now?
Yeah. So in the beginning of the question, you asked we're tackling a very broad market. How do we even think about that? And in the end, I think this is the most unique time in developer tools and infrastructure ever because everybody's a developer. And I think you can say that, but then you have to acknowledge that, yes, everyone has programming capabilities now thanks to AI, but that does not make them programmers yet or expert level programmers. And you have to meet that emerging market where it is. And that's why I've thought deeply about how do we, invest quite a bit of resources in a product like Director, because I'm betting on this future of developers who are going to have some problem. And our market is one where it's so broad that I've seen so many use cases. There was a 50-year-old dairy company in Iowa who never hired a single engineer ever. Until this year, they hired an AI engineer, and that engineer used Browserbase to automate some gas price collection workflow. It's so interesting, right? And if we could play a small part of that, I think it's very powerful because there's just so much work that happens online that could be automated and allow people to do better things. And hopefully our customers who might be building whole on vertical AI applications that are automating that work, or the solo hobbyist who wants to automate that thing for them, teaching them what's possible and showing what's possible is really where I spend a lot of my time. And I think some of the people I'm inspired by, like Jeff Lawson at Twilio and Patrick Collins at Stripe, they spend a lot of time inspiring people you can accept a credit card now. Here's what you can do with that. Or here, you can send a message. This is so interesting, right? Those are market creation moments that took a long time to really catalyze. So we're strapping in for that long haul. On our relationship with the broader internet, well, first of all, I don't think the web's going to have to change. I think that, if you change your website for the models, you're kind of changing your website for the models of today, but the models are going to be able to browse your website, in any form, probably better than we do relatively soon. I expect model level intelligence, especially in something that's code driven or code parsed, which is web browsing, to be on par, if not better than people very, very soon. So you're probably gonna have to build websites for people anyways, because we're organic brained, and UI is still going to be the same. And if you have to build a website for people and AI can use it, you probably don't need two separate websites. You can just build the one for people and let AI use the same. It's kind of similar to how Waymos drive on the roads of San Francisco. It probably is more efficient for us to build a dedicated lane for AI driven cars. But instead, we've just taught them to drive among us. And now they actually drive safer than us in some ways, right? So it doesn't require us to rebuild all the infrastructure. But then there's the people who maybe not want to be scraped. And I think this falls into two categories. First of all, Browserbase is not a scraping company. We're an automation company. So we're pretty cost prohibitive to scraping use cases. And there's a lot of other players that tackle scraping. For us, we really think about how do we help empower the individual to automate some work on their behalf. And a core belief of our company is that, I should be able to have my agent access my software on my behalf. Now, there are some business models that, they want to keep your data locked into the platform. But with the rise of GDPR and other data rights, my agent should be able to access my data just as well as I can. Like, why is it okay for me to ask my browser to go do something, but I can't ask my agent? So we are really believing that AI has a right to use your software just as much as you do. And that means we're going to help it do what it needs to do. In our partnerships with companies like Cloudflare, which was just announced a few weeks ago, we're working to make sure that both sides can work together. And there's new frameworks being released like WebBot Auth, which will allow us to be an arbiter of good bots and say, hey, we looked at this person, we verified that this use case is legitimate, they're not abusive, and you should let them through because they're going to hopefully bring some value to your website.
Yeah, I wanted to ask, just because there was some controversy about the Cloudflare partnership and like what it means to have an open internet and like how that could impact it. I know we could probably spend a lot of time on this, but what's kind of your thinking around that? I thought it was a pretty like outlandish thing to come out of one specific person specifically, but like, why do you think it stirred people up so much?
Well, I think you're talking about how Gary Tan called Browserbase and Cloudflare the access to people.
Yes.
I just want you to know that me and Gary were all good, and we had a lovely photo together when I saw him at dinner the other night. So there's an armistice. We're all okay. And I think what's important is that, like, one, we're not only partnering with just one provider. It's not like Browserbase, Cloudflare, everyone else is locked out. We're partnering with many, many different providers on the internet. Cloudflare is one of them. Okta is one of our investors. We did some partnership with Stitch recently as well, and we have more coming. So it's important for us to integrate with every part of the web. And the second part is that this is opt-in, right? Like, our customers don't have to use the WebBot Auth framework. They can continue doing what they want to do, and we're going to service them just as well. I describe it as like TSA pre-check for agents. Like, if you want to go get TSA pre-check, you're going to get through security faster. But if you don't, you still have a way in. I think it's important you maintain both of those things. But for people who do want to take an extra step ahead of time to register the use case and say, here's what I'm trying to do, we're going to work really hard to make sure that those people who put in effort and who want to browse the web in a fair way and contribute back to the internet in a positive way, that we can help them as much as we can, because we think those people are really, leaning into the future.
So our last question every episode is our favorite question, which is what kind of advice you'll be giving to other founders in this space. And I noticed you've been doing some, I guess, angel investing or investing on the side. So I'm sure a ton of founders are talking to you. What has been your number one advice you've been giving them?
I mean, I try and talk most people out of starting companies. Is probably maybe bad for your business, but I do genuinely believe that starting a company should be something that you have to do, not that you want to do. And for many founders, one question I ask them is like, hey, if I paid you $10 million right now to not start this company, would you still do it? And like, genuinely, everyone will say yes for signaling, but like, genuinely think about that. There are so many other ways to, make an impact and make a difference and find a job that's fulfilling. And being a founder is a really challenging job. You don't get to turn it off. You don't, oftentimes, especially as a solo founder like myself, you're on the hook for a lot of things. So I really challenge founders about why they're starting this company, and to think deeply about that, because when things aren't going well, you have to have that conviction that you're doing this because you want to, not because it's going to work, and you really believe in this thing that you're building. And if you don't have that like baseline conviction, I think it's never been easier to start a company, and that might make it such that more people who start companies that shouldn't. And for this reason, I think second-time founders often, the reason why I enjoy working with them is they have overcome a lot of the positives you get out of the first time you start a company, which is like these lessons you learn, like, oh, what's a cap table like? And the second time, you've already like chewed glass, and willing to go back and chew glass again is quite a big thing to come to, including myself. I really didn't think I should start this company after the first one. I said I'd never would start another company again. But when you have an opportunity and the mission really aligns with your background, sometimes it makes sense to go again. And that's why I did it. And when I meet people who have kind of came to that realization, I'm all for supporting them and taking on this really, really hard job and, making it through to the other side.
Awesome. Well, that's a really good note to end on. This was an awesome conversation, our first demo that we've had on the podcast. So setting records. But thanks so much, Paul. This is really, really awesome.
Thanks, guys.